Experts by Experience Youth Elections Youth Disability Hustings event ahead of the elections on the 6th of May. This event is going to be recorded. Could you please turn off your cameras until you're asked to speak because of the BSM interpreters to give them screen space. Thank you. Closed captions will be in use as well. We're holding this hustings jointly with NASH Livability College, enabling disabled young people, to have a voice. My name's Barry McDonald, and I'm the peer development worker for Bromley Experts by Experience. We are a deaf and disabled user-led organisation based in Bromley. We work with deaf and disabled people and carers to. We believe in the social model of disability, which says that people are disabled by the barriers of society, and not by their impairment or difference. A hustings is a non-impartial event, meaning that this event does not focus on parties, on one party's view, but rather brings together candidates from the different parties in order to for voters to hear their views and policies or key disability issues. I will now hand over to the chairs, Michelle and Melody, who is going to share the start with a hustings event. Thanks, guys.
Hi, I'm Melody. I am the project assistant for X by X, and I will be co-chairing this hustings with Michelle Daly.
Hi, my name is Michelle Daly, and I am the co-chair with Melody today. And we hope you're going to have a really exciting session. And I'm also the director for the Alliance for Inclusive Education. I'm now going to hand back to Melody.
In order to remain fair, we will give each candidate a chance to speak in rotating order, in alphabetical order of their first name. If I'm trying to see the list of who's first in alphabetical, Jonathan Andrews, if you would like to introduce yourself first.
Thank you very much, Melody, and thank you to everyone for attending. It's great to have a session like this organised. I am, as you say, Jonathan Andrews. I am the Deputy Chairman of the Orpington Conservative Association, and it's been great to be asked by Peter Fortune, who's the Conservative candidate for Bexley Bromley, to take part in this hustings due to my knowledge and kind of experience in this area, and also my personal experience. So I am very passionate about including disabled people in politics and including young disabled people in particular. I have worked with the Conservative Party to put together a toolkit on access to elected office for disabled people. I grew up in the London Borough of Bromley myself, and being on the autistic spectrum, it didn't hold me back. I was able to do well in school and be supported through that, to then go to university. And now I work in a law firm in London, where I lead the initiatives there to really make sure that those barriers that are often in the way for disabled young people in society can be removed. And we've been very successful in securing employment for a lot of disabled people. And that's also something I found that on the Greater London Authority, the Conservatives have really supported, including our leader, Susan Hall, who's recently put out a report on breaking down barriers for disabled people. So, as I say, it's really great to be here today, and I think this is a great idea to have this Disability Youth Hustings. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Julie Island, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hi, I'm Julie Island. I'm standing in for Alan Tweddle, who is the Lib Dem candidate for Bexley and Bromley. I just want to say how sorry Alan is that he can't be here. He is registered blind. He travels everywhere with a guide dog, and disabled rights are very, very important to him, as I'm sure you can imagine. He's been a campaigner for disabled rights long before he joined the Lib Dems, and he's been a wonderful example and flag bearer for us, showing how, as the introductory speaker said, disability is very much in the minds of society, not in the minds of the people that sometimes wear that tag. So Alan was our candidate in the general election in 2019, and he's our candidate this time round for the London Assembly. His blindness has never held him back. Technology has helped him hugely, but also the attitude of everybody around him that he's just Alan. He's not Alan who's blind. And he's a real flag waver for us. The Lib Dems have got very strong credentials in the world of disability anyway. We have a Liberal Democrats Disability Association, for example, who always do a presentation to conference. We've done a lot of work locally. So, for example, Caroline Pidgeon is our Liberal Democrat Assembly member who has campaigned very vigorously for better access to public transport for people with all kinds of disabilities. We had the tragic incident of a blind passenger who fell off the edge of a platform at Eden Park in Beckenham 2 years ago. And this was entirely due to the fact that tactile paving hadn't been installed on an unmanned station. I mean, these are things that shouldn't be happening. 25 years since the Disability Act was introduced, we shouldn't be seeing incidents like this. Caroline has worked her socks off to get the transport authorities to agree to escalate the introduction of tactile paving into unmanned stations. So that's just one example. I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say to me today, and I'll be sending a report back. And Alan is very keen to hear as well. It's only because he's unwell that he's unable to take part today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Mark Filippo, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Hello, apologies. I live right by a train line, so I'm hoping that you not be too disturbed by that. I'll put myself on mute when I'm not speaking. Yeah, my name is Mark Filippo. I'm one of the co-chairs of Bromley Green Party, and I'm here to represent our candidate, Mary Iron, unfortunately can't be here because she works for the NHS. She's a community psychiatric nurse and isn't able to get the time off, given that she's off for later in the week for the election and the count. Mary herself has lived in the borough for about a decade with her husband and her 2 now teenage boys. I myself have lived in Penge for 14 years with my wife and my 2 teenage children. One of my sons is on the autistic spectrum and has been schooled in local schools and is now at Croydon College undertaking a construction skills course. So we fully understand that the need to follow a social model of disability. It's not the impairment or the condition that is the issue, but it's the way that we as a society have failed to adapt appropriately to that. We as a Green Party also have a track record, as you'd expect us all to be saying, around trying to highlight these issues, and particularly around access to public transport, which is obviously a very key area for us. So, for example, my local train station, Penge West, if you can't use steps, you have to travel an extra mile down the line to Annerley and either then come back or come back one station because there is no step-free access on one side of the platform. I think the other thing that recent events have shown us is that the coronavirus as a global pandemic has hit society as a whole, but it has definitely impacted on certain communities and certain people with certain health conditions more than the wider public, and there hasn't been enough consideration of the additional support needs that people may need and additional protections, and we would be keen to explore that further within London. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. We're really excited to hear what you want to tell us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Stefano, I'm glad you managed to get here before your introduction. Would you like to tell us about yourself? I don't know if you heard that because you have now joined again. But Stefano, would you like to introduce yourself? I believe you were on mute, by the way.
No.
You still appear to be on mute, unfortunately.
Oh, hang on a minute. Hello, I'm here now, right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfectly.
Fantastic. Sorry about that. Bit of a drama to get logged on. And one of the things we've had to get used to over the last year is using modern technology. My name is Stefano Borrella, or otherwise known as Steph Borrella. I'm the Labour candidate for Bexley and Bromley in the up-and-coming election this week, and I'm also a councillor in the London Borough of Bexley and have been a councillor for 11 years, and my day job is I'm a chef in a restaurant and cookery school in London. So the reason I've decided to stand in this election, and I've stood for parliaments before, is that there's a couple of things. Firstly, this pandemic has changed the norm that we've all done, and there has to be a new norm, and one of those I think has to be that we look for more green and sustainable ways of using transport. So certainly, we need to be encouraging people to be using more sustainable modes of transport. So i.e., walking is a fantastic way of getting around, cycling, and also, driving is still something people want to do, but we need to make sure that we have those access for sustainable energy points for electric cars, and encouraging people to using that, and of course using public transport, like the buses and the trains. And we need to keep on improving that accessibility, particularly people who have additional needs and are disabled and impaired, who are blind. There are many issues on the London network where it is not easy for people to access that transport, and there are many examples of just nightmares for people to get around. And indeed, in Bexley and Bromley, there was a very unfortunate event at a station where, unfortunately, a blind person, there was no tactile paving. So there is still a long way to go with regards to transport. So I'm very keen advocate of public transport, and I use public transport a lot. We need to see more of that. The other thing is housing. You know, there's a housing crisis here in Bexley and Bromley. It used to be when I was younger that it was in inner London. Well, it's not. It's here in Bexley and Bromley. And Bexley is one of the cheaper boroughs in London, and Bromley is a little bit more expensive. But these, you know, properties are going 3-bedroom houses for 500,000. And most people now, the only opportunity they have to live in their own place is to live in a very exorbitant.
Who should I?
Hello? Hello? Is that okay?
Sorry, I was supposed to be on mute. I do apologise.
That's all right. Okay, I'll carry on. Yeah, so we need to see more real affordable housing and social housing being built, because the housing waiting lists in Bexley and Bromley are increasing, and people need to have that hope. It shouldn't just be beholden to the private rented sector. There is very little opportunity of people getting on the social housing, council housing ladder, and affordable housing, or some of it, the way they class it as affordable housing, is a joke. And I think the mayor has done a lot of good work over the last 5 years. And if I'm elected, and if Sadiq's elected, we will carry on to keep on looking to get more affordable and council housing. The final point is about safety and community safety and policing. You know, Sadiq did increase the police officers by 1,300. The government did cut the police officers, certainly after 2010, and we saw cuts to police stations. We need to see more police officers on the beat. And we know when you talk to people and residents, as I've been doing over the last couple of weeks and months, that you speak to people, one of the things is their fear of crime is very much there, and the perception of crime is very much there.
You there, Stefano,
that's okay.
We are running a little bit late, so we have
to. Okay, I'll stop there. No problem at all. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Michelle, over to you.
Yeah. Oh, hi everyone.
Sorry, can we just swap interpreters? Can you put D on for me, please? Thank you.
Are we good to go? Hi. So let me just quickly run through the programs, and just in case people are mindful of when we have a break. So we will, in a minute, be having our first question, and there will be a comfort break at 12 o'clock, and then we will be taking 2 more questions after that, and then we'll be aiming to end around 1 o'clock-ish. If anyone's got any questions, we can paste them in the chat box. If that's not accessible, you can indicate in any form, and we will make sure that we respond to them. We have had people submit questions in advance, so we will be asking those later on in the session. So it's over to me now. I'm now going to take our first question from Chelsea. Chelsea loves music, walking, being outside in nature, anything to do with food, and she's an expert trampolinist. So Chelsea, would you like to ask your first question?
Hi, hello. So the question is, one of our students is frequently bullied by her next door neighbours. So you can hear she makes loud vocalisations and she's very anxious. The neighbour bangs on the walls and also shouts things when she's in her garden, which no doubt makes her more anxious when she's at home. What can be done to educate the wider population about people with learning difficulties so that individuals are treated with greater respect in society?
Did you hear the question, or should we repeat it? Do you want to repeat that question again, Chelsea?
Okay, one of our students is frequently bullied by her next door neighbours. She makes loud vocalisations and also has anxiety. The neighbour bangs on the walls and also shouts things when she's in the garden, which no doubt increases her anxiety when she's at home. What do you think can be done to educate the wider population about people with learning difficulties so that individuals are treated with greater respect in society?
Great, thank you. So the question is, what can be done to improve society's understanding about the experience of people with learning difficulties. I'm going to direct that question to Jonathan, and you've got 5 minutes. Everyone's got 5 minutes each to respond to the question.
Thank you very much. And I just say it's very, really upsetting to hear about that experience. Not necessarily, and, as somebody who is on the autistic spectrum myself, and grew up and sometimes would face a lot of attitudes like that. Doesn't necessarily surprise me, but it is absolutely, I'm upsetting to hear about that, and it's just a sign really of the lack of understanding that exists. I think in terms of what can be done to educate and help people understand more about learning disabilities in particular, but also I think disabilities in general. I think really part of it does come back to that, that as we've been stressing previously about the social model of disability. And I think that a lot of people will still kind of see difference through, especially disability in terms of maybe having, just behaving in the way that people wrongly find odd or, don't understand as being somebody's fault or a negative aspect of somebody, and reacting in a very negative way to that, and not recognizing the fact that we're all different, that learning disabilities and difficulties and all disabilities are just they are, as I say, imposed by people not understanding in society, but recognizing that those individuals are just who they are, and recognizing that and appreciating that and respecting people's differences. And this is something I'm very passionate about. I've been working with the Conservative Party over the last few years on really inclusion within the party, and also, as you say, in the local area, and really been focusing on changing these attitudes. And also in the work I've been doing with a lot of different companies and education establishments, and I've spoken to a number of schools in Bromley, really on changing that conversation around disability. And a huge amount of the time it's really focused, people have had this preconception of oh, somebody can't do this, or this is a problem because of that, or their behavior is challenging, for example. And actually, what I would say is, think of it in terms of what is it that person finds challenging in that environment. What is it that is causing that person stress? Because disabled people are people like everybody else, and it's really, I think, trying to empathise with that. I've personally, as I say, experienced it, so I'm able to kind of share the experiences I've personally had in terms of kind of maybe not wanting to do things out of anxiety, and people sort of not recognising that and thinking, oh, we'll just force them to do it and it'll be fine. And actually that really doesn't work. But actually really looking to people and understand them, having that bit of understanding and working with people. And also in terms of, disability, I think, and also this is something that will, I think, particularly be true for learning difficulties. There will be people thinking, oh, well, they can't do anything, for example. And actually, a lot of what I've been doing and what the party's certainly been supporting is this view of don't look at it like that, but look at, people are different, have different skills, and you can contribute different things to society and need to be supported in different ways, absolutely. And we need to have that support in place. But we all bring something different to society, and being able to recognise that. And I think that actually can be where a lot of these attitudes come from, in terms of negative attitudes towards disabled people, is kind of seeing us as a problem, as opposed to parts of society that we'll have to get on with, and trying to understand the barriers that actually exist in our way, and how we can work to remove those barriers, and make it a better place for everybody. So I think it's really just that education as to what disability actually is and the barriers that people face. And it's not something wrong with somebody, it's a difference that people have. I think that would go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. The next one in order for the speakers is going to be Julie, Mark, and Stefano. So Julie, do you want to go next?
Hi, thanks very much for a great question from Chelsea.
5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks again for Chelsea for a great question. That's clearly from the heart. And it really upsets me to hear about the bad experiences she's been having with her neighbour. I think we have to assume that her neighbour is ignorant. It just doesn't understand what harm her behaviour or his or her behaviour can do to people. That's an individual issue, and I have masses of sympathy for Chelsea. But on the bigger picture, things aren't going to change until there is community awareness and engagement with people with all forms of disability, so that we're all aware of each other's struggles. Education is where a lot of the problems start. Years ago, anybody with any kind of learning disability never had any engagement with, if you like, mainstream schooling. That has definitely changed, but it needs to change more. Evidence over and over again has shown that integrated education benefits both the children with learning disabilities and benefits the children in the mainstream schooling. So, we certainly would like to see more of that. We think that what we've seen during the pandemic is the old-fashioned idea of communities really coming to resurgence. Street parties, street support groups, people getting to know their neighbours. I absolutely admit that I hardly knew any of my neighbours before the pandemic started. But I now know over 100 of them really quite well. And you get to know people and as individuals, and that means that you meet people that you don't normally come across in your everyday life. We really believe that communities are a strength in so many ways, but also it means that you can include everybody, regardless of their skills or their abilities, in these different groups. Basically improve community inclusion for everybody, regardless of their disability, is one of our key campaign issues. There's clearly also a strong role for the media here. I'm sure we all know that it was very unusual 10 years ago to see anybody with any disability appear on any drama or news programme. And I'm really pleased to see that's changed, but obviously we want to increase that, appearances of a whole range of people with different abilities and disabilities. We also campaign for an understanding of what different people can bring to the workplace, and that's something that we feel is key to helping people get to know all the strengths of people with so many different disabilities and abilities, and understand people as individuals rather than just seeing a label. And I would just like to say thank you to Chelsea for asking the question. It must be a very hard thing for her to talk about her personal experience. And I send her all my best wishes that she can get to know her neighbour, and her neighbour can get to know her and understand all the great things that a relationship between the two of you can bring to each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Now time for Mark.
Thank you, and yeah, thank you again, Chelsea, for the question. I think it's these sorts of questions that sort of make those of us who want to be in politics or want to try and make a difference have to stop and think about how our policies will actually make a difference on the ground. I think in my experience, and I've worked in social services, I've worked in supported housing with people with learning disabilities and other support needs. And I also have a niece who has Down syndrome. And I think in my experience, I think there are two types of people who might respond in the way that your neighbour has, Chelsea. I think there are those people who are ignorant and just don't know, as others have said. And all of the sort of positive things that have been talked about, increased representation, more appearances in the media, more opportunities for people to explain their strengths. So working from what in my sort of work, we call it a sort of asset-based or strength-based approach. So rather than saying what someone can't do, saying what they can do. So for you, Chelsea, you know, you enjoy your walking and your music and nature and food, and you're great at trampolining. I wouldn't necessarily know any of that if I lived next door to you. So it's about trying to know about what you're good at. But I think there's also a second group of people who are just scared or frightened or not interested in anything that people think, where people think other people are different from them. And I think that needs a slightly different approach. So I think as a society, we've actually gone a little bit backwards around this recently, where we've had more separation. I agree with Julie's point that the pandemic has brought communities closer together, but I think it's tended to be those people more central in the community rather than those at the edges. And most of our big debates have been quite divisive. So whatever your view is Brexit, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, it was very, very argumentative. And those of us on one side didn't like the people on the other side and vice versa. And I think if people just do not like and cannot accept that someone else has the right to live a different life to them, and don't want to learn and don't want to try and do things differently, then I think we have to look at what support can be given to people like yourself, Chelsea, around potentially reporting this as a disability hate crime, which is a recognised separate piece of law where if someone is doing something nasty or unpleasant or aggressive because the other person has a disability, the police should take that more seriously than if not. And I think there's the two things. I think we should do all of the attempt to educate and support other people to understand. But if they won't take those opportunities, we need to be prepared to actually hold people to account for their actions. Now, it may be that your neighbour has their own stuff going on, and it might be that they might need support with stuff in their life, but that's not an excuse for carrying on as they are. And you, Chelsea, have the right, same as them, to live your life without feeling intimidated. So I would want to take a sort of two-way approach. I think we need to try and support and increase knowledge and try and ensure that people understand that everyone is bringing something. But for people who won't or can't, then we do need to look at police responding to those situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Stefano?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I've unmuted myself this time.
Sorry, could we just use this time to swap interpreters? Thank you.
All right, absolutely.
Thanks, Stefano. Go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'm unmuted, so that's good as well. Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. A very good question. I'm sorry to hear about the events with your neighbour. But sadly, this does go on in this, well, all over the world and in this country as well. And it's something that we shouldn't tolerate at all. And like you, I like food as well. I mean, anyone to be bullied is not acceptable. No one, in my view, should be bullied. We're all different. And we all have, I mean, we describe learning difficulties, but I think everyone has additional needs of some sort. And I think we should look at it that way. We all have our needs and additional needs, and I think we should celebrate that. Now, I have to say, before I became a counsellor in 2010, I didn't know much about people with learning difficulties at all, like I didn't know much about people with dementia and other conditions. And when I started to go around and see, seeing different people in supported living units and seeing actually, these people, different people, they're like you, they like football, they like walking, they like food, music, all the things that actually probably your neighbour and yourself may have in common. And, that's the kind of thing we need to be saying, that there's more that unites us than divides us. And that's the thing I saw, that I thought, wow. And there were also, when I went to see our fantastic young people in these homes, and you see the things that they can do that I couldn't do. And that was quite interesting, playing music or doing things that I couldn't do. And I think that's the key, is to show that, I mean, certainly we've all had neighbours that maybe we haven't got on. You see the programme Neighbours from Hell, and this sounds like a Neighbours from Hell from yourself. But I think a lot of it is about showing people what people from different communities have to offer. And I think a lot of it, 50 years ago, people would have been put away in homes, hidden away from society. And although things have moved on, I do think there needs to be more actually showing people and understanding and saying, look, this is people, with different conditions that we need to understand more, and understand that at different times that the neighbour banging on the wall isn't going to help the matter at all. And I think sometimes when people actually go in and see different people and interact with different people, I think that helps to break down those barriers. The other thing is when, in public life, we talk about all kinds of different sections of society becoming more involved in political life and public life. Women 100 years ago fighting to get the vote, ethnic minorities getting more representation in Parliament. One of the things is there have been people elected with different needs. We have had people in Parliament being elected. There are people who have been elected with learning difficulties and have had additional needs. And those are the kind of things that I think we need to say, look, actually, everyone who is active in political life may have an additional need, and highlighting actually people can contribute to make people understand, actually, because more people who interact with public life and are able to and feel that they're not being bullied for that reason, they can come in and say, look, hang on a minute, this policy that your party is proposing, whichever party it is, actually does not help people in this section of society that I come from. And I think that's part of it, that we all need to understand each other better. The other thing is, I would say, is there are people who don't have any additional needs or learning difficulties that behave in a disgraceful manner, quite frankly. And I think, you only have to go out late at night, or maybe late at night when you're traveling in public transport, to see how people behave. And those are people who don't have any additional needs or any excuse. And sometimes I think people need to say, hang on a minute, I'm not behaving in a very good way. And hopefully your neighbour will understand, if I was on the other side of that wall and you're being nasty to me and everything else, and it was me that was receiving that, I don't think your neighbour would like that at all. So I just think we need to have a little bit more love in this world and a lot less hate. And unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've had all kinds of, debates that have, I think other speakers mentioned this earlier, but I think we need to love and celebrate the differences. And I think I probably wouldn't have understood, I've still got a long way to go, but maybe if I hadn't have gone to see people in those different settings, maybe I wouldn't have understood that when I see someone maybe on public transport, standing back and give them a bit of space, a bit of time, or we all have bad moments, give people space and maybe a bit of understanding. And I just think a little bit more love, I think would go down very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano and everybody. I think that's the end of the speakers. I'm just going to just sum up some key points. So it's really disappointing what Chelsea was sharing with us, but unfortunately her experience is not isolated. We hear many of these stories. We've raised concerns about being hate crime, disableism, and we've seen that when disabled people are kept separate from society, around disconnection and our separation from non-disabled people. And also another thing I think what Chelsea's raised is around the issue around how disabled people are homogenized in terms of isolated this issue as it being focused on her as being a disabled person. But Tracy is also a young woman. and also Chelsea's also a Black woman. So there could be other experiences coming out of that, intersectional discrimination. So there may be, so there's other concerns that we need to be thinking about when we take this agenda forward. And it's something that I would ask you to think about in terms of moving forward the experience of disabled people by not homogenizing the experience. She's a young, disabled Black woman. So are those experiences linked to more than one agenda? So moving the conversation on, I'm now going to hand over to Melody.
Hi, I will now be reading out a question that has been submitted by one of the young people who unfortunately couldn't attend today. Sorry, I've lost the question, which isn't very helpful. Here we go. The question they asked is, how do you propose to make communication more accessible for disabled residents and visitors in Bromley so people are aware of clubs and groups in their local area? I will ask Julie Ireland to answer that question first, please.
I'm really sorry, I didn't hear the question. Sorry, Melody, could you
Okay,
try that again?
Yeah, I'll repeat it, don't worry. How do you
Melody,
propose?
sorry
Yes?
to interrupt. I see that I think Amal's actually joining us.
Oh, okay. We shall change the questions.
Is that
very
okay? Sorry about that.
That is perfectly fine. When Kamal is set up, I shall hand over to them to ask their question.
Melody, did you want to do Kamal's bio?
I shall do. I am just looking for it. There we go. Kamal is 20 years old, enjoys listening to music, cooking, and going to hydrotherapy. He's a very sociable young man and enjoys chatting to people. This is your cue to ask the question, Kamal.
Hi, Kamal has a question which I'm going to read to you first, and then Kamal's going to sign it. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
Biggin Hill Library and West Wickham Leisure Centre have very poor wheelchair access. How would you make this more accessible for people to use who are disabled?
Biggin Hill, Broken Leaf, West Wickham, gym, upstairs, no lift.
Okay.
So I will pass that question to Julie. I can repeat it if need be.
I understood and heard it fine, thank you. So first of all, hello Kamal, thank you for asking your question. I live in West Wickham. I know that gym very well, and yes, the disabled access is really poor. There is a path where you can take your wheelchair into the training pool. And it's not just for wheelchair users, it's for all people with mobility issues. But I think everybody accepts that that particular leisure centre needs an awful lot of work. And I don't know if you know, but it is all due to be renovated. The plans have been being discussed by Bromley Council for 5+ years, I think, and we will soon have, well, not soon, a new gym, which obviously has to have, and we want it to have, good disabled access, and that will include lifts to the upper floors, but not just that. I mean, access to the changing rooms is very difficult for people with disabilities, and that has to be improved as well. I don't know Biggin Hill Library, I'm afraid. I'm sorry that that doesn't have access. I am very surprised, and I would like to ask the council on your behalf why that is. My understanding was was that there was access for all wheelchair users to all libraries in Bromley, and that's simply not acceptable if that's not the case in Biggin Hill. So I hope that answer helps you. You have a moral right and a legal right to have access to all public buildings, and I absolutely stand behind you to make sure that those rights are delivered to you. And I thank you very much for asking the question today.
Thank you for answering that question. I shall now pass it over to Mark Philippo.
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much, Kamal, for your question. Is my video on? I think it is. Can't see me though. Yeah, so thank you very much, Kamal, for your question. I live in the north of the borough, so I don't know West Wickham Leisure Centre or Biggin Hill Library very well myself, but I understand obviously that they must be very important to you given your love of music and hydrotherapy. I had a quick look at just now a picture of Biggin Hill Library, and I could see that there's big steps in the entrance up to it. I couldn't obviously see whether there was any sort of ramp or anything like that. I have been once in the library, and I do know that there was an upstairs element that I walked up the steps to, and I have to be honest, I didn't notice whether or not there was a lift, and I'm guessing there isn't, otherwise you wouldn't have asked the question. And I think this is an example of why any sort of planning needs to involve people who use those services and maybe have different needs from the majority of people, because I like to think I'm fairly wise to these issues. I've mentioned how I've got personal experience and work experience, and yet I've been in that building and I didn't notice whether or not there was a lift because I don't need to use a lift. And so I would hope that with the 5 years of planning that's been happening about West Wickham Leisure Centre, that the council has ensured that the consultation about what is needed has included consultation with those people who would actually experience and use that centre and would need to make sure that it worked for them, so that it wasn't people like me deciding what was needed for other people, but those people telling us what was needed. An example is I worked for a council, not for Bromley Council, a different London council, and they got a lovely new building, and it had all these concrete pillars in it, and it had been designed to be accessible, but no one had stopped to think about the issue if you have a visual impairment, and so they had to go around and paint all of the pillars, and also the carpet had to be changed because it had a pattern, and for some people on the autistic spectrum, they got very, very interested in the pattern, and it stopped them. They sort of got they stopped and focused on it and didn't move on. So what we would want to do, and we are committed to improving accessibility in all public buildings. And as Julie said, there is a legal requirement for that to be the case. But I think sometimes it's not being done very in a very sophisticated, very clever way, because we've just looked at the big things about, is there a ramp? And can you get into the main building, but not can you then get into all of the parts of the building. So we would want to work with people like yourself, Kamal, to make sure that a building was as accessible as possible, and that we would also look to make it a requirement of any organisation wanting to run services on behalf of the council, because the leisure services are not run directly by the council, that a question area that made a decision about tendering, so that's giving them the contract, was how would you ensure that you made your building and the services in it as accessible as possible to everyone in the community. And apologies, Kamal, that I don't know much about the two particular buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're just going to swap interpreters again, please. Thank you.
While they are swapping, I will ask Stefano if you would like to answer the question next.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Kamal, for a very important question. And like you, I like cooking as well. Well, first of all, coming from Bexley, I've obviously been to Biggin Hill, but I haven't been to the library. And West Wickham Leisure Centre are two things that I would certainly, first of all, need to go down and actually see the problems down there and understand those issues. But the first thing that strikes me all the time when we talk about, disability legislation and making accessibility is we don't ask the right people the right questions. So, for example, Kamal has got an issue there at Biggin Hill Library in West Wickham. Are we asking those groups that have those accessibility issues the questions about accessibility? Usually it's an architect or a designer or a council officer who says, yeah, that's fine, that complies with the legislation. But actually, we don't ask those groups of people that actually need that accessibility to access, even change rooms, access into the library, accessing as much of the facilities as possible. And it does strike me that we never ask the right people the right questions. And that's certainly something that I think needs to change. I know there is some consultation, and I think it's very patchy with different councils that happens. And there are groups in every single borough. And I think everyone should be asking, what do you think about this new leisure centre? Is this going to be good for you, for your service users and people with additional needs and disabilities? So I think that's always the thing that strikes me, first of all. And of course, as you say, when I go into these facilities, I don't see those problems. You're not going to. I mean, first of all, I'm fairly tall, so you don't see those issues, and we need to talk to people and understand that. The second thing, if I'm elected, the first thing is to, certainly speak to the council and obviously the providers to make sure that they're working on sorting this problem out. It shouldn't wait to a new building. There are many things that can be done, even with older buildings, to make sure they're accessible. And all those issues. And I think, as the other speakers have suggested, there are many, many issues. It could be the carpet, as somebody said, or the colours. And those are the kind of things that are very important when designing, not just, can the wheelchair fit through there? There are many other things and factors that have to be brought to bear. So I certainly would be wanting to work closely with the council to make sure this is sorted out. I'm more than happy to raise it as well with Labour colleagues who sit on the council in Bromley, and just raise it with them and make sure that maybe the right questions are asked to make sure that this issue is dealt with as quickly as possible, because quite frankly, it's unacceptable. And the excuse is always there's not enough money. Well, there is always money found, and we've seen that over the last year that there's always money. And I think there is money can be found, and we should find it to make sure that every single person can access the services that every single person pays for.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And finally, Jonathan, would you like to answer the question?
Thank you very much. And I think this is a really interesting and important question. As you say, I don't necessarily know the specifics in terms of these buildings as with the other speakers, but actually it is a very widespread issue, and across, in fact, the entire country. And when we're thinking about accessibility, as you say, it's important to remember that not only is it the right thing to do for any building, really, to be able to be accessible to the whole community, and particularly sort of buildings like this, but there is also that legal right that was in the 1995 Disability Discrimination Act that was passed by the Conservative government then, and has since been codified into the Equality Act for disabled people to actually be able to request reasonable adjustments, and for organisations to actually think forward about implementing those. It's something that I, as I say, I'm very passionate about, and it's particularly good to see in the context of the London elections that the Conservative London leader, Susan Hall, in her report that she brought out earlier this year on breaking down barriers and making London more inclusive for disabled people, has listed out a number of recommendations. The first of which is in fact to work with boroughs, disability groups and businesses across London to establish a platform where disabled people can find disabled accessible venues and areas to help make London more accessible and inclusive for disabled people. So I think really striking at this particular issue that more actually needs to be done across the whole of London, and in fact I'd say across the whole of the country, because this is something that in lots of my work with disabled people and disabled people's groups, this comes up. It's actually really needing to increase that inclusivity. And as people have said as well, it's not just about the physical adjustments and the physical changes to buildings that may be important, though of course they are very important, but it's also thinking about the other changes that might need to be made. And so, for example, in addition to those that have been spoken about previously, it might be as well in a library, for example. There are obviously, some quiet areas in library, but there might be particularly individuals on the autistic spectrum who might need very great silence, and so, or indeed there might be others who may sort of want to make ticks and stim and sort of make do things to calm their own anxieties, and or just general patterns of what it's they do that might sort of disturb others. So that maybe having a separate section where people can do that, for example, and be supported in doing that. These are all important things to be thinking about, and I think that it's just important for people to bear that in mind. And I think that really the key thing is where people are putting together things like this, or the other libraries or buildings, just having that in the front of their mind. But it is something which I've seen has happened really across the country, and in fact I'd say across the world. This is an issue, general accessibility, because disabled people can't access the same parts of society, the same services, the same workplace as everybody else. Then we aren't we will face those barriers in terms of kind of being able to work with others. So I'd say just needs they're much more thought, I'd say, in general around that. But I'm really pleased to see that the Conservative Party is taking steps and has taken steps to deal with that issue. Thank you.
Melody, you're mute.
I did unmute, but I think I muted myself again. Thank you for answering those questions. And just to sum up very quickly, it was sort of highlighted that there needs to be more focus in asking local disabled people what their needs are, rather than relying on the architects to decide what accessibility needs are, and that having just one area of a building accessible is not enough. And we really need to start focusing on this when discussing disability access. I believe that brings us to our break. I shall ask our lovely BSL interpreters whether you would prefer a 5-minute or 10-minute break, and we will go for whichever you would prefer. And it is. We shall now have a 10-minute break.
Melody, do you want to say what time we're going to come back?
Oh, 12:15, I believe. We shall be coming back. Yes, that is 10 minutes. I had to double check. Thank you.
Hi guys. I just wanted to make something clear from the one of the questions earlier. The question about the neighbour. I wasn't sure whether it was asked from
the actual person
from
who asked
from the student, or whether it was a general question. So we
of the school
of Nash College. So just wanted to make sure that was clear. Thanks, guys.
So it's back to me, yeah? Cool. So I hope everyone had a good break. So I'm going to be asking Melody to take the third question.
Sorry, I was struggling to get my camera to turn on then. Okay, this is that question that was submitted by someone who unfortunately couldn't make it today. I've lost it now after rearranging it. Here we go. How do you propose to make communication more accessible for disabled residents and visitors in Bromley, so that people are aware of clubs and groups in their local area that accommodate all? And the first person I shall ask for that one is Mark Filippo.
Thanks, Melody, and the original questioner. So I think it's similar to what I've said earlier about the question about accessibility, which is that to ensure that communication is more accessible, we need to be asking people who have difficulties with the way that communication has generally been set up to suit the needs of the majority of people. I just had a look and looked at how we have made our Green Party manifesto accessible. And I would say that we've done okay, no better than that. You can read our key policies in about 20 different languages. You can hear a mini manifesto as an audio version, or you can see on YouTube a mini manifesto with British Sign Language. But that is a mini manifesto, so that's sort of 8 pages out of 68 pages. So even with those efforts, we haven't really done enough to make sure that the whole thing is accessible to people who would need it in an audio form or with British Sign Language. And we also haven't included things such as the use of easy read documents or photo symbols or things like that. So again, I think that what it would need is for the council as a whole and the GLA to be pushing forward accessible communication at every single opportunity. I have the Mayor of London and London Assembly's election booklet here, and it has a page on every candidate for mayor, but I can't see very easily how I would get this information in any other way. It does say it's available on the back in Braille, large print and audio versions, but if I needed those, I would need someone else to tell me. Instead, we need to be moving towards that people's communication needs and preferences are noted, and that communication automatically goes out in the most accessible format. And then where the council and the GLA lead, businesses and other organisations will follow. And I think, again, it comes back to something that we talked about earlier about understanding what people with communication support needs bring to the community. And one of the things that bring is spending power. And if I was running a business, I would want every single person who had money who might want to spend it on my business to know about it. And so I would very readily make that more accessible. with the question is about groups and about that are accessible to all. And if I understand the question correctly, that's asking about communication about not specialist groups, but about groups that will accommodate people who may have additional support needs or may not. So a chess club for people regardless of their support needs. And I think it comes back to education. I think, again, when people are setting up such groups, they need to, and by they I mean I need to, if I was setting that up, need to consider that not everyone who might want to be part of my chess group might play the game the same way as me, because they may not be able to move the pieces, but also may not be able to hear about a club in the same way as me. So again, I would want to go back and hear from people about A, what the interests, and B, how we could communicate that and in what ways we should communicate that. So it shouldn't be that you have to ask to be communicated in a different way. Information should be given in a variety of ways from the beginning. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you for that. Next, I would like to pass the question to Stefano.
Yeah, thank you very much, Melody. Yeah, very important question. And in fact, communication, I think we can all do better at communicating. I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it? All of us, every single person. You know, some people, oh, I didn't hear you were doing this. Well, sometimes we didn't communicate it as well. And I think communication is the key, isn't it, to everything. But of course, you know, we say, well, I've put it online somewhere. Or I put an article on page 16 of the newspaper, forgetting that maybe some people don't have access to the newspaper. First of all, the newspaper probably isn't delivered. The second thing, is it easy for people with different needs to access? Can they get into the library to go and access that newspaper? I think we had that from a previous question as well. And, you know, again with online, you know, do people, we know, I mean, we assume everyone's got a computer, and we assume everyone's got a computer that people with different needs. I mean, there are computers that can be adapted. Do people who need access have that computer access to actually get online? So we assume, you know, when we put it, I put it online, it's there, and I put it in the newspaper, so it must be okay. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people who need to see and be reached can actually have access to that. So I think that's the key thing. I think it goes back to the questions before about asking, you know, all the groups, every single borough, and Bromley and Bexley are no different. They've got groups of people with hearing, blind, learning disabilities. Every single group, there's groups and support groups. And sometimes when people are setting up social groups or sports groups, you know, are they accessing or do they know these groups are available? And that's the other thing that I think it's linking the people together. So actually, well, I'm setting up this, you know, a sports club, and it could be accessible for many different groups. Well, how do I access and how do I get in touch with those groups? And that's something, you know, councils can do. They can facilitate and have, these are the groups in my local area. The GLA can certainly help with that. And I think there are many occasions when many different stakeholders don't talk to each other, when if they did talk to each other and say, well, hang on, did you know there's a group there? And that's the thing, isn't it? You know, if people can access a group, do they have people like today we've got British Sign Language and those kind of things, where I think people need to talk to each other and we need to cross-reference. A lot of people have access to different groups. We don't tell it to all the stakeholders. So I think very simply an easy access where people can, you know, actually communicate with each other and say, well, by the way, there's a group that I think would be fantastic. And it's about linking those people together, not just saying, I've put it in the newspaper, I've put it online, and I've ticked that box. I think you've really got to think about the people you're trying to reach out to and actually reach out to those people and say, look, this is what I think we need to be doing, because there is no, you know, there are many, many sports and pastimes that can be accessed by many different groups. You know, we see it in the Paralympics, you know, many different fantastic sportsmen doing amazing things with a variety of different needs. And it just shows you that if there is that access, we could be producing the next Paralympian for the next Olympics. And I think that's something we should be advocating. But I do think there's a lot of good work going on. We just need to make sure everyone is talking to each other and make sure everyone knows what's going on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I would now like to pass this question to Jonathan.
Thank you very much. I think, as you know, has been said before, communication and letting people be aware of what's out there is really important. And I think, and I'm thinking particularly, I suppose, in terms of what I'm seeing from an autism perspective, but it's true, I think, for disabled people in general, is there can be sometimes a kind of a one-way approach to communication taken or assumed in terms of, oh, well, people don't really understand communication, for example, rather than seeing we come, people are different, might be expressing their views or opinions or interests in different ways. And actually it's a two-way thing in terms of how we can best explain ourselves while understanding, what it is that the other person, that disabled person, for example, is saying. And I think that thinking about communication in terms of that two-way thing, actually, it can be really helpful more widely, and particularly in terms of ensuring that when you're putting information out, it is accessible to as many people as possible. I'm just thinking about the recent toolkit that the Conservative Disability Group and the Conservative Party recently launched, actually, on disability, and including disabled people in local parties and in kind of local politics. And I know that obviously the question talked about kind of local activities, etc. And I think that actually politics is an example of that, because the majority of people who might want to get involved will usually go through their local party first. And so making sure that that's accessible is really important. And I was really pleased to see that the party put together accessible versions in terms of easy read, large print, audio, British Sign Language and Braille, none of which was necessarily quick to do. Also incurs cost, but actually they said no, this is something that's important to us. We need to make sure that we are reaching out to as many people as possible, particularly given that this communication is about including disabled people in politics. So I think that there's a great amount that can be done actually by local businesses and by local activities and local youth clubs and other kind of things, and whatever it is that there's available locally for them themselves when putting out communications, to ensure that these are accessible and inclusive of disabled people and of a wide variety of disabled people as possible. I think it really does come back to that point around having that inclusion within all spaces of society, and that is how disabled people can then lead equal life to others and being able to access that. So I would absolutely champion the importance of thinking about how we're communicating, and certainly encourage businesses and of organisations to really think about how they can attract and make themselves accessible to the widest range of people as possible, and that includes disabled people. I find myself in a lot of the work that I do in my day job, when I'm talking about accessibility to employment, actually people can sometimes think of it in terms of, oh, well, what special things do we need to do to kind of to make it okay for this, almost as if disabled people are kind of a section apart almost. And actually what I find is really effective is saying, no, what you're looking for are great people, and that includes the whole of society, and that includes disabled people. So think about how to mainstream the main routes into whatever it is that you're doing, whether that is a workplace or whether that is a community centre or a library or any sort of community activity. make sure that the inclusion is mainstream, so that everybody is able to access that in the way that works for them. So just to reiterate, I think those are, communication and accessibility are really important. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And again, just to quickly sum up.
Sorry, Melody.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. And again, just to sum up really quickly, it's apparent that we need to automatically publish things in the most accessible way, and that mainstream groups need to make themselves accessible, not just specialist groups. And people in general need to be aware that just because something's accessible to one group of disabled people, that doesn't cover all groups of disabled people. Miss Julie, I am terribly sorry. On the list, your name was not there. I do very much apologise. Would you like to answer the question?
Thanks, Melody. I would, yes. No offence taken, don't worry.
No, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. It's a really complicated job that you're doing. I'm full of admiration. It's going very well. But I do actually have something in our manifesto specifically about this. So when I heard the question, I thought, this is great. We've actually got some serious solutions to the issue that's been raised here. Part of the Lib Dems London manifesto mentions forming a London youth service. There's a whole range of reasons and purposes for the London Youth Service, but one of the specific requirements is that this youth service can coordinate and improve access to activities that happen all over the place by small and larger groups that you only get to hear about because somebody mentions it, you happen to click on a link, a friend of a friend of a friend tells you about it. So the idea is that it's going to be we don't want to take away the value of community groups. You don't want to kind of regiment them and lose that spontaneity. But the London Youth Service will coordinate between groups such as community halls, faith groups, sports clubs, libraries. There's pop-up things happening in empty shops, theatre groups. Some companies run schemes. There are after-school activities at schools. Masses of different places run these kind of ad hoc activities, which are really valued. And the idea is that the London Youth Service would coordinate these, help people make them accessible for people of all disabilities, and when you're looking for something to do or some particular interest, it will be a resource for you to find out about what's happening in your area and what's accessible to you. So sorry for barging in. I wanted to answer that question because I think it's so important, and I do think this is a real idea that hopefully all parties will grab hold of as being really valuable to everybody, and particularly all young people of all abilities in the capital.
Thank you, and sorry again for missing your name off the list. It was not intentional. So yeah, again, just to sort of sum up, it's important that we listen to the needs of the people we are publishing communications for, and that needs to be a priority. And I am now just double checking that I have asked everyone, and I shall be passing over to Michelle.
Thanks, Melody. Great stuff. So we've come to our final question, and we've had a submission which Melody will be asking the question, and I will chair the this session. So Melody, question, can you read it for us?
I surely can. The question that has been submitted is, how would you encourage employers to take on more disabled people for work experience or volunteering positions in Bromley?
Right, thank you. The first person I'm going to ask to take this question is Stefano, and then after that I'll go Jonathan, Julie, and Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. A very good question. Well, I work in the hospitality industry, which I would say
we need to time it.
It is an industry that I think could do a lot better to give access to people with different disabilities in the workplace. You know, I would certainly say there have been examples, and there are kitchens where, and restaurants and bars where they have been able to give that space and opportunity. But I would say it's very minimal. So I'm using an example of my own experience in where I work. That I think definitely when this is a classic example where the kitchen's been designed and the restaurant's been designed, where they haven't had any thought of that. There was a very good example, 15, I don't know if you remember Jamie Oliver's kitchen, where actually they had people with different disabilities and additional needs working in the kitchen, and they had carefully thought out that kitchen. So it can be done. So I certainly advocate that, because you know, I do think we need to give opportunities for people with different needs in the workplace and enrich themselves and give them that opportunity to say, look, yeah, actually, you don't know. There could be a hidden talent pool that we're not tapping into to make sure that people can get into the industry. You know, there's a whole variety of industries that I think people with different needs can access. I mean, you know, 50, 60 years ago, you know, people were literally put on into hidden away from society. And certainly in my time when I've been a governor, you know, I've seen, you know, children with different additional needs actually brought into the education system. I think we've got a long way to go in the workplace. And and the thing that I suspect is, or I know it is, that the people with different needs tend to go and work in certain workplaces and settings. You know, we have a great reinstate which employs people with different disabilities in Bexley, but the opportunities are limited. And I think it's about, you know, saying to different employers, look, there's a talent pool here that actually you maybe could tap into and could actually have talent and skills that you don't realise are there. And I think that's the thing. So certainly in my industry, that's something I think we need to get. We are in the dark ages, and I think that's something I need to do. Look at my own workplace where I am, but actually say to other people working in the industry, look, we can actually make this industry a lot better to access different talent pools and bring people into that. And there's so many different skills out there, and there are skills that I don't have, other people have, and we should be accessing that. So, you know, that's something that if I'm elected, but never mind if I'm elected or not, you know, I'm a councillor, you know, I do think that's something we need to do even at job fairs and all those employment events, to say, look, you know, first of all, is the job fair accessible to people so they can actually get into the building where these job fairs take place? And also, you know, there are lots of employers there who purport to be, you know, investors in people and all these other wonderful things that they put on their entrances to their buildings. But actually, you know, what are you doing for people with different disabilities and additional needs to access that? Of course, you know, they're, you know, we look at different employers, they're going to want to think about their business. But I do think it's about showing case and saying, look, actually, there is a fantastic talent pool out there. Why don't we use it? Thank you very much. I've got to jump off now. Is that okay? Because I've got to shoot off to another meeting. Is that all right?
Great. It'd be good to hear final thoughts of what you're going to be taking forward.
Yeah, so just to say, it's been really, really good to join this meeting, and I think it's food for thought for me that the questions that have been asked today are actually, you know, thought-provoking. And, you know, I'm a councillor, so if I'm not elected or I am elected, these are things that I need to think about more deeply. But certainly, one of the things I will be looking at is accessibility on transport, which I think is abysmal in Bexley and Bromley, and there can be more than done. There are stations that have been on this list for 30 years, and I think this needs to be done, and particularly tactile paving. So I'd like to thank the questioners for actually provoking some thoughts and actually, you know, thinking in a different way, and, you know, bringing those issues that maybe I hadn't thought about in the past. But thank you very much for your invitation, and I'm sorry I couldn't get on earlier, and I thank you very much for the way the debate has been conducted as well. It's been very, very good. Thank you.
All the best. Jonathan, if you can go next.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think really the question of encouraging employers to take on more disabled people for work experience or for volunteer positions very much does come down, I think, to a question of kind of mindset and awareness of disability. Very similar, in fact, to many of the other issues that we've discussed today. But I think very often the term disability, because people see it through a medical model lens, it can be interpreted as this person cannot do something. And unfortunately, it's often then seen that, oh, well, they won't be the best person for this job because they just won't be able to do whatever it is they have to do at this job as good as anybody else. And so there's kind of an assumption that rules people out based on that assumption before people are often even given that chance. And I really think it's about, changing the perception to recognise that, as you say, disability it is often something that society itself has a role in creating through barriers that are put into place, but also that the conditions and the differences and the forms of learning difficulties or neurodiversity or physical impairments or whatever it is that fall within that term of disability affect people in different ways, and it might well be that a certain person's disability doesn't necessarily have any impact on the key core skills of a job. And this is something that, it seems perfectly obvious to myself, I'm sure it will to many people here, but it is something that I think a lot of employers just need to have sort of explained, and it's that changing of the mindset that I think is really important. In terms of the practical, how you actually go about doing this, particularly in terms of kind of volunteer positions and job experiences, I am a trustee of Ambitious About Autism, which is a national charity for young autistic people, and we work with a lot of businesses with what we call the Employ Autism Strategy, which actually where we support businesses to be able to offer paid internships to young autistic people, those aged 25 and under, to be able to get that experience in certain areas that they might be interested in. And so I'm sure there are many other initiatives like this as well that exist. And so businesses across Bromley, I would certainly encourage to look into what support is out there in terms of being able to actually offer this support for people. And the interesting thing about that scheme is that initially, when some employers were signing up, there was work done to say, well, what you'll get out of this is autism awareness training or understanding, and we'll come and give you some training and we'll get you support, etc. And you can put your name here and there and you'll be seen, etc., doing a nice thing, blah blah blah. But actually, once employers tend to actually take a cohort, they don't really care about all that because they realize that they're already getting a lot of good through the people that they have working with them. Because it's not just a matter of doing a nice thing for disabled people and giving them a job and giving them work experience. It's actually, being able to utilize the talents everybody has and recognizing that looking at it from a strengths-based approach means that they understand actually there are really good skills that many, particularly young disabled people, have that are missing out, and those are skills that will exist across the disabled community. I think particularly for young disabled people, where it's really important to get that foot into a job and to get that experience to be able to kind of continue into work and get that continued experience. That's where things like those kind of internships or volunteering are really important. And even looking beyond the kind of schemes like that. Yeah, sorry, can I just make one final point?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah, just saying looking beyond the schemes like that, it might just even be a matter of saying to employers, it just taking somebody on for a week's work experience, for example, outside of any of these sort of big sort of internship programs, etc., but just being able to see people face to face, I think, and seeing what people can do is just really important. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm now going to ask Julie to
Just
speak.
going to swap interpreters as well.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Thanks for letting me talk on this topic. I'm an IT manager in a company based in the City of London, and I can proudly say that the IT industry is one of the few industries that embraces people with all kinds of disabilities. You know, I appreciate not everybody wants to be stuck behind a screen for the rest of their life, but I just know that the IT industry that I'm very proud to be part of embraces people, especially people with, say, for example, autism. Google was specifically targeting people with autism to come and work for them last year, I seem to recall. I have a son in his 20s who also works in the IT industry, and obviously we do spend our whole life stuck behind screens, but people's disabilities are irrelevant in that field. So, sorry, I thought I had somebody interrupting me then. Okay, I'll carry on. So as I said, not everybody wants to spend their life stuck behind a screen, but I do, you know, I do applaud my own industry there for the fact that there are no barriers to people joining. In London, we've got rising youth unemployment, and the Liberal Democrats have taken the view that what we need to do is we need to set up a London apprenticeships hub. Apprenticeships are a great way for people of all abilities to experience life in a work environment and to gain qualifications as they work. And what we want to do is to set up a London apprenticeships hub. Now, this will specifically address the aspect of accessibility to everybody. The idea is that we'll provide advice and guidance and encouragement to all employers so that they can make their work opportunities accessible to people of all levels of disability, and all, you know, everybody in London knows how hard the capital has been hit by the pandemic, but there are a lot of new opportunities. There's a lot of new businesses starting up already, or new companies who've taken advantage of some of the new opportunities that the pandemic has thrown our way. And if we can start them with some helping hands to show them how they can offer apprenticeships to young people across London of all abilities and disabilities, I think we'll all benefit from that. And that's a key part of the Liberal Democrat London manifesto.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Now over to Mark.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Because I'm going last on this one, there's a risk I'm going to be repeating what other people have said, but apologies for that. So I think for me, it comes back again to what we were saying earlier about taking a strength-based approach and ensuring that employers are presented with the skills and experience and knowledge that people with disabilities can bring to a role. And I think Andrew's experience of employers potentially coming expecting one thing, that they'd feel good about themselves or something like that, but actually finding that employing people with disabilities but with those strengths is a reward in itself for those organisations. I think is key. I think we've touched on earlier that there is a difficulty with communication and about getting opportunities out there. And there is also a problem with media perceptions around disabilities. That at the moment, our view would be that there is the need to do targeted work to ensure that people with disabilities have opportunities to access work experience and jobs. That we can't rely on a simple, well, it's there, will just help you have the same opportunity to get to it, because the knowledge of the opportunities is not shared equally, and employers' knowledge of the workforce is not equal. We'd also want to look at things that we could do to ensure that to try and maximise the opportunity for work experience to lead to jobs and for jobs to be sustainable. So we are committed to increasing the London living wage to £14 per hour from 2022, and that would be extended to under 18s and apprentices, because at the moment there is a bias within the system that is unfair against younger people. It doesn't cost younger people less money to rent or buy a loaf of bread, but they are allowed to be paid less. So we would want to correct that. We also are committed to doing work to address pay gaps around gender, around those from minority ethnic backgrounds, people from LGBTQ backgrounds, and also for those with disabilities who tend to be paid less than people from from backgrounds like mine, to be honest. And I think the last thing I'd sort of say is coming back to the communication thing is about ensuring that employers had an idea about a wider workforce. There's been studies that show that people tend to employ people like them due to what's called unconscious bias, that people tend to associate with people like them. And if organisations are closed shops, that will be continued. So it's essential that work's done to open up those opportunities, and that people with disabilities have the same opportunity as everyone else to consider whatever career they might want to, rather than just a small number of careers. So we would want to broaden that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm just going to make sure everyone's had the opportunity to speak. I think they have. So we're coming to the close. We've got 7 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly wrap up and then hand over to Melody and Barry to do the final words. So the key bits that have come out of the conversation is there's a need for employers to be accountable for their actions and ensure that they remove disableism in employment. And also thinking about where some of these deep-rooted levels of inequality are happening in the employment sector, and much of that has been driven from the segregation within our and separation within our education system. So I think I'll leave that with a final word and say thank you for everybody. And it's been an enjoyable session and great hearing from the young people taking lead on this. Over to Melody. Melody, you're mute.
I did it again. I would just like to very quickly say thank you to all the candidates and fellow young people who have asked questions, and just everybody who came, and BSL interpreters and captioners. Yeah, just thank you. And this has been a really enjoyable thing to co-chair. Over to Barry.
Thanks, Melody. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, especially the candidates. Thank you for all your questions. All your questions. There't a lot of things that have come out of today that we could follow up on at some other time. But I just wanted to say I'd like to thank our funders, I Will Foundation, the London Community Foundation, the Community Fund, and Department of Digital Culture and Sport, and Media, sorry, and Sport, for making this this event possible. a big thank you to the candidates, and especially NASH College for to the students for answering those amazing questions. And I'd like to thank Melody and Michelle for the chairing today. And there is a feedback form if people would like to fill in the feedback form that's available. That'd be great. On behalf of X by X and on behalf of X by X, I'd like to say thank you for everyone for coming. Yeah, that's the end of the Hustings.